Welcome to SASA's Book Club. Today we are joined by Dr. Malayna Evans to discuss her book, Neferura. And before we get started, I am just going to throw up a slide deck here to briefly discuss what SASA is and what we're all about. SASA stands for Save Ancient Studies Alliance. Our mission is to promote the study of the ancient world and engagement with our human deeper pasts, building a grassroots movement through outreach, collaboration, accessibility, and public scholarship. We work toward the goal of inspiring a wide, inclusive community of scholars and students. And you can follow us on all these different platforms. If it exists, we probably have a presence out there somewhere. So if you are passionate about ancient studies, please follow us. We always have awesome events going on and fundraisers to help support ancient studies and awareness for, some of the things going out there regarding ancient studies. So please follow us. Just some etiquette about our event. We are live streaming across 5 platforms, and there are chat features available on these platforms. Please feel free to post anything in the chat. If you have any questions during our discussion with Dr. Evans, please feel free to ask them. Just be kind and respectful, ask thoughtful questions, and have fun. This is being recorded and it will be available on our YouTube channel as well after the recording. So if you want to watch it again or share it with anybody, please feel free to do so. And if you enjoy our live events, we also have Archeo Gaming as well as the book clubs and reading groups. We do have summer reading groups coming up. So if you guys are interested in anything like that, please check out our website and consider supporting SASA and our mission here. And that is it. We do have a QR code up at the top of the screen if you want to go to our website and support us or check out all the other things that we are doing to support ancient studies. So please check out that link, and we are going to jump right into our questions, talking about this awesome book, which is available in our bookshop. So my first question is, you have a PhD in Egyptian history. Was the idea for Neferura inspired by something in particular that you studied? Where did Neferura's story begin, and what about it made you want to write an entire novel?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Yes, I do have a PhD in Egyptian history. And my interest throughout the many years I spent earning that PhD really was kind of about women's history. I do a lot of gender theory, a lot of religion. So that kind of, the 18th dynasty is particularly rich, and the entire New Kingdom is rich if you're interested in women, because you have the Darel Medina evidence. There's a lot of very strong royal women in the 18th dynasty. So it's sort of a good spot to, I guess, start if you're interested in that. For me, even before I went to grad school, I kind of in my mind really wanted to grow up to be like a Robert Graves or a Margaret George, but I didn't actually think I'd do it. But to be honest, I didn't think I'd really get a PhD ever either. So I don't know, sometimes you just kind of keep going and things happen. But once you're in a program like that, it's so all consuming. I forgot all about writing. It's not a very creative space necessarily, so I was sort of, studying the language and memorizing dates and doing that kind of stuff. And so it wasn't until I was out of it for quite a while that the interest in writing came back. But I never sat down and thought, who should I write a book about? Neferura just sort of always lived with me. She had walked with me for years as the person, if I were ever going to try something like this, the one I would sort of start with. And I think it's because, of course, her mother is Hatshepsut, the great female pharaoh, and that's just interesting, right? What's that relationship like? What did Hatshepsut think she was doing? Did she think she was so exceptional that she could be pharaoh even though she was a woman, or did she think women could be pharaohs? And if so, how did that impact Neferura? So I think there are questions there that might seem kind of modern, but I'm a modern woman, so I think
I
that's
love
okay
it.
for historical fiction.
Yeah.
And then I just think also, Neferura is very invisible. She has this very powerful title. She has a lot of resources. It's a wealthy priesthood that she's in charge of. But we don't know that much about her. So I found her just sort of an interesting character.
I love that. Yeah. So this is kind of a different question, but what were your thoughts on Hatshepsut? Why Neferura instead of Hatshepsut?
Yeah, right. I don't know. It's a little insider baseball, I guess. Everybody knows Hatshepsut. Nobody
Yeah.
knows her daughter. And I just thought, in a way, it is kind of a book about Hatshepsut. I mean, it's a different lens in Hatshepsut. It shows her as a mother. Spoiler alert, people should not be mad at me, but she's not a very good mother. And I did that intentionally. I kind of wanted to make her a more complicated character. I think we always make Hatshepsut this just lovely, she's always shown as just this amazing woman. She was a successful woman, to be sure. We don't know anything else about her, of course. And I kind of wanted to show a more complicated, messier version of Hatshepsut through the eyes of her daughter.
Love that. And that definitely came across.
Yeah.
So it's clear from the story and from your website that you're very passionate about ancient Egypt. Besides Neferura, what were you most excited to explore in your novel and share with readers about this time and culture?
Yeah, that's another good question. I mean, I would say there's probably three things I really wanted to sort of pass on. One was just the role of women. What did women's lives look like? What were their limitations? What could they do? You can only do so much because I'm in a royal, she's royal. She has other people in her life who are not, so I've tried to nod to that. But I did kind of just want to show what it was like to be a woman in this very patriarchal system, how it relates to our life today. I think one thing that speaks to is, women in the 18th dynasty had power kind of like ours. They they were legally equal. By custom, they were not equal. And then, of course, for many, many years, thousands of years, women have gained and lost power many times. And I kind of wanted to speak to that a little bit. I wanted to talk about the belief system, sort of what it would, what the mindset would be like, and what, what it's like to go through daily life with this very different set of assumptions about the world. Once again, you can only do so much of that and speak to a modern audience. So there was tension there. And the other thing I wanted to talk to, and this kind of gets back to the Hatshepsut question, I wanted to nod to the fact that these are authoritarian regimes, really. Those of us who study these ancient cultures, we love them. I am, obviously incredibly fond of ancient Egypt. But I'm also aware that, I wouldn't judge a modern culture by how cool their buildings are. I would judge a modern culture by how many people have access to healthcare and, if their people have access to good food and so forth. I think it is not always comfortable, but worthwhile to think about sort of the society and the power structure that lies behind those amazing buildings left behind for us to all enjoy, and what that might have meant, for regular people. So part of the reason I wanted to make Hatshepsut more complex was really to kind of get into this idea of how she used propaganda, kind of what authoritarianism kind of looks like. So those are maybe three things I kind of wanted to put into the book somewhere.
Yeah.
And then the goal as a historian is to do it in a way that you don't feel like you're, getting lectured at.
Yeah, for sure. I did not get that at all. Habiba left a comment here that's very interesting. I couldn't agree more with you about Hatshepsut being a successful person. But yeah, definitely she doesn't strike me as a good person at all.
It's funny, this is also modern, but I was thinking when I conceived her about like work-life conflict that we all have, it's very hard to be incredibly successful and an incredibly engaged good parent. Like there's tensions, and maybe that's a modern construct, but again, nobody could do it all then either. So I sort of made her a very good ruler and a very bad mother. That makes sense to me.
That makes sense to me too. And I have 3 kids, and I'm trying to do so many things, and it is a struggle.
It's hard to juggle.
Finding the balance.
It sure is. Exactly. I wanted Hatshepsut to have some of my challenges in life. Yes.
Yeah. I think that came across very well. I was feeling Hatshepsut's pain a little bit. Yeah. So in the story, Neferura encounters a network of female spies, spoiler alert, that ultimately play a role in how her life plays out. So was there a historical reference for these spies? Where did you come up with this idea?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So no, as to my knowledge, there is no sort of group of women who are doing a runaround around the patriarchy in ancient Egypt that I'm aware of, although one can hope. But you know, if there were, they would have been quite invisible in the historical record. But there were two historical things that I had in mind as I wrote these characters. One was, and I was working on the book when I think they discovered a mummy at Deir el-Medina of a very, very tattooed woman, a woman with tattoos all over her body, and they were all kind of Hathor related. So she inspired the wise woman in the story Hathor. And then I guess maybe that put tattoos in my head, and I was thinking a lot about, this isn't really a historical thing so much as a historic graphical thing. These tattooed images on tomb scenes. There's a lot of images of tattooed women in ancient Egypt. Earlier scholars just coined them sort of, you know, low-class women, prostitutes or something. And I think it's because you had this group of, I don't know, 20th centuries men who were buttoned up and thought, ooh, women with tattoos, trashy. You know, as two women with tattoos, we're like, hey. Sorry, I'm getting overcold. So, you know, recently scholars have proposed all sorts of other ideas about what those tattoos mean. You know, like maybe it's a religious group, or it could be all sorts of things. We don't really know. We do know there were a lot of women with tattoos. So I kind of wanted to give them a positive and really powerful spin.
I love that. Yeah, I feel like our culture against, you know, our cultural lens of tattoos is shifting a little bit. I hope. I know when I was a kid, it was like if you had a tattoo, you were like the worst person in the world.
Yeah.
And I that's changing, and I'm so happy.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Because I want more tattoos.
Yeah, I do too. My 21-year-old came home with a tattoo not too long ago, and bless him, it was an ankh.
Oh, I love that.
I was like, okay.
Love it. Awesome. Okay, so next question. You include a number of intriguing rituals and customs of ancient Egypt. For example, Neferura consumes a concoction in which alligator dung is an ingredient in order to prevent pregnancy. And there's also a type of urinalysis test to determine the sex of a child using barley or wheat. Were these practices actually recorded from ancient Egyptian records? And if they were, where did you encounter these details?
I love this question so much because kind of so much is like taking history and then doing a spin. The crocodile dung comes from Papyrus Kahun, which is around Middle Kingdom, maybe 1850-ish. And it has a reference to crocodile dung. Now, I think the way it is used in that, the most likely interpretation of that is it's used as kind of like an IUD, a kind of barrier, mixed with like honey and acacia. Honey is because honey is a natural antimicrobial agent, so it would sort of kill infections if you were in fact to insert crocodile dung in your body. That's not quite how I use it in the book, but that's why I chose that ingredient, was because it had been, you know, referenced in Kahun. And then the pregnancy test, we have a couple references for. That is clear that they would urinate on wheat and barley. Now in the 60s, somebody attempted to test that, and in fact it worked quite well. About 70% of the time it would predict pregnancy. There's something in the hormones when you're pregnant that will actually make barley sprout. Now in ancient Egypt they thought, and I'm going to get this, I can't remember which is which, but if one sprouts it's a girl and if one sprouts it's a boy. That is not actually that is not tested to be accurate at all, but it does speak to pregnancy a little bit. So, you know, probably fairly effective. And you know, crocodile dung as an IUD with honey to kind of minimize infections probably had some efficaciousness as well.
Sorry, I had a little one.
I figured a little one.
Okay. That is fascinating. That
It
it's
is, isn't it? It really
a real thing.
Yeah.
So
Well, thing I kind of twisted a little bit in the way I use the dung is as kind of an abortifacient. That's not. I mean, I'm sure they had them. That, to my knowledge, that's not a dung-ish thing that I'm aware of. But it does show up in
the historical record.
In the historical record, yeah.
That is awesome. I cringed when I was reading that part, but I was like, hey man, you know, whatever you gotta do.
That's the other thing is I think when I first drafted that, I think I had acacia. I was talking about acacia because that shows up in a lot of women related spells. But then I was like, let's go for something a little more out there.
Yeah.
So I kind of wanted to pick something that was a little more provocative, I guess.
And what's
more provocative than crocodile dung, I suppose.
I love it. Okay, so my next question. Oh, were there any other little details that you didn't include in the book that you want to make note of?
There were so many. I will tell you one thing. When I started to write, I really wanted to kind of convey sort of a more Egyptian worldview. You know, they didn't really understand the way the brain works. They didn't have our notion. You know, in our language, we have so many ways we refer to this kind of mind-heart dichotomy. It's so embedded in our speech. And I really wanted to not put that on my ancient Egyptian characters. And I pound my head against that wall for months before I was like, I just can't do that. My first draft really had a lot. I sort of was working hard to sort of note that they think from their heart and kind of some of those very different worldviews. And it was just too clumsy. I couldn't make it work. So there were definitely things that I attempted. The first time I had somebody read my work, I hired somebody years ago to read something I'd written, and she gave me a great piece of advice. So we would take a green pen or whatever and underline everything historical. And then everything that was historical that was unnecessary, I had to highlight a second color. And if it was unnecessary and historical, I could only leave like one mention per chapter. Because she was like, you know, it's too historical, it's too dense. So I have learned to you know, minimize the history a little bit and just use it where it makes sense for the story. That's not easy for me.
That
was not really a historian trying to write.
So. Oh, that is such great advice, but that
was good advice.
That'd be hard for me to do as well.
Yeah, hard. Yep. So things get stripped out, yes, because you're like, that's so interesting, but it's like, okay, but it has nothing to do with the story. So
yeah, I can imagine. I'm thinking about my own writing processes and how that one would incorporate in and how painful that would be.
It's kind of it's like a twist on Kill Your Darlings, you know. You're like,
it is.
Such a good
yeah, because like the history is why we're so passionate about these stories.
Exactly.
Like, this is what I want to share with everyone. It's like, nope, kill it, cut it, get it out of there. Awesome. Okay, so at the heart,
here comes my dog. Gamora likes to be loved every 12 minutes. Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. So at the heart of Neferura is a story about the power women have, even though their society is one ruled by men. What was your biggest challenge you encountered in justifying this paradox in the story?
Let me think about that. I guess the biggest thing is we don't have any evidence, right? There's no diaries from women in, you know, Deir el-Medina or something. I mean, the evidence comes from the very, very wealthy, royal, or the most prestigious nobles, for the most part. I mean, we do have some, even the household stuff we have is from what would count as the middle class, which is a vanishingly small number of artisans, really. We do have some stuff from there. But we don't have, you know, a lot of evidence, and we don't have any evidence of the interior lives of women, the way they thought about being women, the way they thought about power in their society. I really set out to write a book about friendship. That's what I thought I was writing. And at some point I realized really what I was talking about was power and sort of the ways that friendships are not just emotionally comforting, but can be this really useful resource. I have been helped so many times by women in my life that, you know, every time I'm stuck, it feels like there's some woman that's like, oh, Malayna, do this. So I kind of wanted to put that sort of soft power those kind of relationships as kind of systematized in a way. But of course, that's pretty much wishful thinking. We don't have any evidence that suggests anything remotely like that. But if it happened, we wouldn't necessarily have the evidence. So
yeah, but just given how I think that was a safe assumption to make.
yeah, I mean, I don't think nobody likes being disempowered because of how they're born. I don't think.
No,
Not
right.
fun.
No, definitely not. And there's enough in my own historical whatever research wanderings, there's enough instances of women rallying around other women.
Yeah, right.
From every age.
From every age, right.
And
right,
every
right.
culture imaginable. Yes. That's a good assumption to make.
Yes.
For ancient
we
Egypt
have these terrific texts from the wise men, these maxims that kind of tell you how to live your life. It would be lovely if we had one of those from a wise woman, because we know there were wise women in ancient Egypt that sort of worked, to help people deliver babies, kind of work on a daily level. So I think that's interesting, but they did not write they did not publish their thoughts and advice.
Yeah. Or at least if they did, they didn't survive.
Yes. Yeah. Right. We didn't get them. Maybe we will one day. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
I wish my tattooed mummy would have been found with her life tips.
Yes, that would have been so cool.
Would have been.
So, another question here. During your research for Neferura, were there any assumptions you had going in that were challenged and maybe even changed as the story developed?
So many things changed. I think I've already talked about some of the things I was trying to do at first. The other thing is I originally wrote it. Remember, I wanted to be Robert Graves or Margaret George. I originally wrote it as a diary. Then I rewrote it as a memoir. None of those worked. I kind of kept trying to come at it from different angles, having a hard time sort of figuring out how this story really worked. But so that evolved. Another kind of big thing that happened pretty late after I'd sold it, was working with an editor, is I changed the characters a little bit. Mostly Satia, who is Thutmose III's, one of his wives in the historical record, she was not part of the book in the first part, and she plays a role. She is in this book, and I think a character I quite enjoyed. So I added her quite late. So there are definitely, things that evolve. I kind of rewrote this book several times, trying to figure out how to get it where it got. And then once you sell it, you rewrite it more times, because then you have an editor with opinions. So
Right. Cool. Well, I do have a couple of other questions, not that I just kind of thought of on the fly this morning. One question is, for anyone looking to write a novel set in ancient Greece, where do you recommend they begin their research?
That's such a good question. All of a sudden, the first thing that comes to mind is Barry Kemp, because he is an Egyptologist who passed away this last week, and such a great scholar. I would read any of his work. I mean, it kind of depends on which period and place. Egyptian history especially is long. It's 3,000 years, or 2,500 years. So I think that maybe some of the scholars who have written about your time and place, like, for example, the book I'm reading right now, or working on right now, is set in Dar el-Medina. I have a hard time. I don't want to research as I write. I just write from my head and then come back and double check my work after, because the history comes easier to me than the writing. So my stack of books for Dar el-Medina starts with a book called Laundry Lists of Love Songs. I think Kara Cooney's work is always fantastic, as a way to kind of, she's a scholar who writes very accessible books, so she kind of bridges that gap in an interesting way. So yeah, I think I would kind of figure out what the time and place is, and focus on some people who have really talked about sort of the more, the Laundry List and Love Songs. It's a lot of different things that happened in that place. That's rich with. I haven't read it in years, but I know once I get to the phase where I'm going to kind of do a research heavy edit, That's going to have a lot of little details. What did door lintels look like? What did people sit on chairs? What did their furniture look like?
Mm-hmm.
How were the tombs close to the house? What was the relationship? So I know that I can mine that. Just as a reminder, I have ideas. I just don't know that my ideas are. I just need to double check my work. So yeah, I think just kind of figure out what your time and place is, and the scholars that speak to that most directly.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really good advice. I've never heard of the name that you just said. Can you repeat the name?
Was it Karakuni?
Yes.
Karakuni. She wrote The Woman Who Would Be King, and she's written a lot of really she is, I think, at UCLA, but she also has a podcast that's very good called Afterlives of Ancient Egypt.
Ooh, awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. That sounds awesome.
She is an interesting scholar, I think, that does a lot of stuff that's kind of that ask questions that I think is sometimes hard as scholars to ask, right? We don't, there's not a lot of benefit to ask, like, what were they thinking? What was the Hatshepsut thinking? Well, we don't know. We don't have evidence for that. So yeah, she's an interesting person. I think go for it. I think she has some involvement. I'm seeing a note here, and I think that's right. I was gonna say I thought she'd been on some SASA thing I'd seen her on before. So
yeah, perhaps so.
Yeah. But she's definitely worth knowing if you don't know her.
Absolutely, yeah. When you read a story about ancient Egypt, what is critical for you personally in making the setting feel authentic? Like, what the kinds of things do you look for as a historian?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think you just kind of want the ambiance. I think smell is super. Ancient Egyptians seem to talk about smell a lot, so I want to know what things smell like. That seems like a big thing. Obviously, the heat is important in ancient Egypt. So I think things like the makeup. I think noting that the men wear makeup too. It's not a gendered thing. Like little details like that show you understand that the kohl in the eyes is not just with the women but with the men as well. Some kind of authenticity about the time and place and what they might have been wearing, what furniture would have looked like, what the space would have looked like. But often we don't know that. I had to just completely make up a palace. I have no idea what that palace looked like. I don't even know if it was on the East Bank or West Bank. And that decision tree, deciding where I was going to put the palace, changed a whole bunch of things. Because if I put it on the West Bank, Neferura, who's a priestess, has to do work. Does she cross to the big temple? Does she have a temple? Like, there's so many things that you have to just make up, and you're just, your guess is as good as mine. So that was, I just made things up.
I love that.
So educated guesses.
Yeah, and that's part of making it historical fiction, right?
That's the difference. As a scholar, you're not asking. You don't have to say what a room looked like or what they were eating for dinner. That's not, if you don't know, you don't know. But if you're going to write a historical fiction book, you need those kind of real life details to flesh it out. And so, you kind of have to guess. Another great resource, I can't remember the name of these scholars. I have the book over here somewhere. But they took food and recipes and they published a recipe book of recipes from ancient Egypt. So that is actually a useful little thing to have by your hand when you're talking about. So, there are little things like that I've collected along the way.
That's awesome. So I actually have a ancient Greek recipe book along those same veins of like recipes they found in ancient Greece. And I actually make the lentil soup a lot.
You? Oh my gosh, I love that.
And my kids love it too.
That's so funny.
Yeah, I love that. That's awesome. So what kind of projects do you have in the works now?
Yes, that's a good question. So right now, I was playing around with the ISIS retelling, and then it kind of morphed into a story of a woman from Deir el-Medina whose husband goes missing. So sort of a whodunit based on the Isis Osiris mythology, who Isis is a little bit involved with. So there's lots of magic. So whatever I do next, I think I'll probably up the mysticism a little bit more. And so that is kind of a jumping into something with a little more mythology. It's kind of a way to do that I think stays authentic to the history, but also lets me play with some of those more mystical elements.
Yeah, for sure. That sounds really exciting. I love the supernatural piece, and weaving that in. I think that would be cool, especially with Isis and Osiris.
Yeah, right.
They're like two of the most famous Egyptian gods. So getting
She's
a story
the best
about
goddess.
them.
I'm gonna just go out and say that Isis is the best goddess of all the goddesses. She's my fave.
Awesome.
And not just worshipped in Egypt, but in Greece and Rome.
Mm-hmm.
Leaves an impact on today's religions with the iconography. I think she's an important goddess. So maybe something that deals with her a little bit.
So the story, are you going to follow like two mortal people, or is it going to be actually
the gods might be puppeteering a little bit, but it's a mortal story, but kind of mimics some of the Isis Osiris story.
Very cool. That's awesome.
We'll see. That's what I'm working on.
Yeah.
Wish me luck.
Sounds exciting. Well, that was all the questions that I had, and we kind of blew through those super fast. So if anybody out there has
I'm a fast talker, sorry.
I am too. If anybody out there, if our listeners have any questions for Dr. Evans, please feel free to ask them. Yeah. Do you have anything else you'd like to share with our listeners, reader, or watchers?
Let's see. No, I mean, I hope people who read the book enjoy it. I wanted to tell a story that was about sort of women and power and soft power, and use Neferura, kind of introduce her, give her a little bit of a thing. I think one thing when you're writing about real women or real people, I think it's true for many people who are writing historical fiction, it's a real person. You're talking about a real person's life, and what right do you have to kind of tell their story? So there's a little grappling with that. I don't know what Neferura would think of my story, but I do know that ancient Egyptians believed they were made stronger in the afterlife when you say their name. So I hope she likes her, name in print on a pretty cover. I like to think that's given her a little bolt.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a cool thought to have. I think about stuff like that too. Like whenever they crack open a new tomb, it's like, what are we really doing here?
Right, exactly. Like, should we be doing this?
At the same time, it's
exactly. I'm like, should I really be? What right have I to tell this woman's story? So hopefully I did it in a way that honors her.
Yeah,
whoever she was.
I think so, definitely. I really enjoyed it. And I really loved just how complicated you made her story and relevant to modern audiences. It can be hard to bridge that gap between the ancient stuff and, like you're saying, like some of the cultural things and like the authoritarian regime and what's in the background. But I think you did a really good job weaving in the timeless conflicts of humanity.
Yeah,
women in particular, being in these situations where, they were born a certain person,
right?
They have certain duties because of that they just cannot wiggle out of, and I think you did a really great job with Neferura's story in that.
Yeah, thank you. I do think I do want it to be relevant. It's interesting. I think it's a little bit of a poor little rich girl story in some ways, but the reality is other women in her orbit have more power over their own body than she does because of who she is. And I think there's a question about, like, if you don't have control over your own body, I mean, do you have freedom? What do you have? She has a lot of privilege. She has a lot of prestige, but does she really have power if she can't make decisions about her own body? I think that's a question I hope I pose with the book.
Definitely.
To the modern moment, I think.
Definitely. And that also, kind of raises questions, at least it did for me, on like what is class really? Like,
right.
Is the privileged class, there's there's problems everywhere.
Right. There are problems everywhere. Right.
Limitations with everyone, no matter what you have or all the possessions and
Yeah.
everything that you have.
Yeah.
And it's important to realize, or just to think about that, you know, like these
Right.
are still human beings. There's problems everywhere.
Right.
And
I put a quote in the wise woman's mouth, something, I can't quite remember it, but something like, you know, you confuse privilege and power. Those aren't the
yeah,
same things.
yeah,
And I think Neferura surely has a lot of privilege. It's not clear that she has much power. In fact, she seems quite powerless. So I kind of wanted to think about that clash a little bit.
yeah. So that kind of raises a curiosity question for me. What did you think about Thutmose when you were writing him and his story? We didn't like, I mean, you know, but at the same time, I don't know if that made any sense at all.
It made sense to me. I knew just what you meant. Yeah.
His story is kind of a sympathetic one, at least early on.
I think one thing about coming to a story with so much background in the history is that you already have sort of biases and opinions.
Mm-hmm.
I can't say why, but I don't like T3, and I have never liked him. I think he's maybe too military for me. Like, I've just never been a fan. So I'm not a fan of, I mean, I wrote, you know, he's maybe ostensibly the bad guy, but he's not really the bad guy in the book. Because I think there's a little bit of a nod to how he got to be the way he is. And so maybe I've teased out a tiny bit of empathy, but, you know, he definitely does not, you know, I'm not sure he gets a redemption arc or anything, but maybe you could at least understand how he came to be the guy he is. So,
yeah.
but there, I don't know why. There's not, you know, most pharaohs, I don't have an opinion about one way or the other. I don't know these people, but occasionally there's someone who you are sort of drawn to or like not. And for some reason, he's always kind of been like a to me. So therefore he was in my book. Hatshepsut I like, but I still made her difficult. But
yeah,
you know.
Yeah. No, I really appreciated Thutmose's story. Not rooting for him in that way, but I appreciated that he wasn't just like a two-dimensional villain.
Right.
He added a lot of depth to his backstory that set up his character in a way that made sense. And I think that's one of the challenges that I encounter a lot in books that I read, is that you get these villains or these, you know, distasteful characters that they're kind of two-dimensional and that doesn't make sense, or it's not explained why they are the way they are. And I think you did a really good job of setting up Thutmose and his childhood. And there were some times that I was just like, oh.
Yeah, he went through some things, you know, hurt people, and that is probably another one of those universal things, that he had some painful situations, and he caused a lot of pain.
Yeah.
So, which of course you could have, like, one could have easily written him as a great guy who was, you could have written Neferura as like a loving, you know, stepmom aunt. I mean, there's so many ways you could have done those relationships. But you know, in the end, you just pick an angle and you run with it.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that, you know, it's not, I'm not proposing this is their actual relationships, because we don't know anything about that. There's all the stuff you know, and then there's all the stuff you can't know, right? You know, Hatshepsut ruled. You can't know what she thought about her son, and you can't know what they thought. And then there's all the messy middle, which is stuff like the food and where the palace is, right? And there's always that, do I not know it? Do we not know it? Is it knowable? So you kind of have to grapple with some of that, and then I think just make some decisions and run.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has really been an awesome discussion. I've enjoyed this so much. I enjoyed the book. For everyone who has been watching, the book Neferura is available on SASA's bookshop.org bookstore. All the proceeds, well, not all the proceeds, 10% of the proceeds used if you purchase the book through this link go directly to support SASA. I don't know how bookshop.org does it, but the books are always less expensive on their site than everywhere else, and they still manage to support independent bookstores and nonprofits like SASA. So I highly recommend picking up a copy of this book. It is a thrilling read. It is very eye-opening and enlightening. I enjoyed it so much, and I cannot wait for your next book.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. This was so much fun.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.